What's up, fabulous family of faith? Did you know you can make charitable donations to your church while you shop on Amazon? That's right, Amazon Smile is a way that you can support Friendship West every time you shop with Amazon. You'll find the same amazing Amazon you know and love with the added bonus that Amazon Smile would donate a portion of the eligible purchase price to Friendship West at no additional cost to you. All you have to do is visit smile.amazon.com and sign in with your Amazon credentials. Select Friendship West Baptist Church Dallas as your charity of choice and start shopping. Remember to check out smile.amazon.com to generate your donations to your church. For those of you who like to shop via the computer, here's a tip. Add the bookmark to make it easier to shop at smile.amazon.com. And if you're like me, you like using your app on your phone, simply open the Amazon shopping app, navigate to the main menu, that's the two bars, tap on the settings, and then select Amazon Smile. Once you do that, you can select Friendship West Baptist Church as your charity of choice. Then follow the on-screen instructions to turn on Amazon Smile in the mobile app. Once Amazon Smile has been activated in your app, your future eligible app purchases will generate donations for Friendship West. Unfortunately, the tablet app is not yet supported, so use your phone or your computer. So remember, smile.amazon.com to generate donations for your church.
My name is Tanya Bradshaw, and I want to present to you a prayer of forgiveness. Mother, Father, Creator of us all, we are thankful for all of life's blessings. Our hearts and minds are open to receive as we embrace your grace and unconditional love. We bear our truths to you on today, and we ask that you release us from the bitterness of past trauma and pains. Our souls have been wounded by trauma. Our spirits have been broken by people who we loved. Our pain has hardened our hearts, and we harbor our unforgiveness like a prized possession. Our spirits are trapped in the past, and our unforgiveness is incubated by our pain. Give us strength to love and the compassion to forgive. Give us strength to love, strength to release, strength to forgive. We no longer want our spirits entangled with the bondage of bitterness. Release us so that we may experience the gift of forgiveness. Purify our spirits and release us from toxic energy. Release us so that our spirits can soar and we can do remarkable things. Release us so that we can have better connections, better health, and a deeper connection with you. Release us so that we may experience a peace that comprehends understanding. Release us so that we can truly learn to love ourselves. We accept the gift of forgiveness. We open our hearts for healing and understanding. Forgiveness is not sporadic. It is an intentional act that allows the soul to heal and for others to experience God's grace. We will no longer hold on to things that do not serve us. We will no longer give others power over our thoughts, emotions, or behavior. We will no longer carry the cross of bitterness. We want to be free, and we want to be free indeed. We choose freedom. We choose to forgive. We choose to release ourselves from the chains of unforgiveness. Give us strength to love as we forgive. And as we forgive others, let us also forgive ourselves. God's grace is sufficient. Our story is not over, and we must learn to give ourselves grace. Grace to make mistakes, learn, forgive, and move forward. Now unto him that is able to heal mind, body, and spirit, we move forward, letting go of the past, but remembering the lesson. Thank you for giving us the capacity to forgive.
Come experience praise the name of Jesus. Listen, I'm so excited I can barely hide it because of the fact, number one, in a month's time, we will be back in stride again, together as a family in fellowship and worship. And so keep praying that the numbers will go right, because I am so looking forward to see that throwback worship experience. Just makes me miss y'all all the more. So I'm so excited and looking forward to the first Sunday, the very first Sunday in April. We will regather here at Friendship West, 2020 West Wheatland Road. I'm also excited because this is Ash Wednesday. And of course, we're moving into these 40 days of consecration as we reflect on the sacrifice of Christ, his liberating ministry, his ministry of healing and hope, and how we need that in the crazy and just evil times in which we find ourselves. And so that makes me all the more excited that tonight is another edition of Theology Matters. Theology Matters because it does, I promise you it does, so much of what goes on that is wrong in the world may in a real sense be traced to twisted, toxic theology. Bad theology sanctioned slavery, upheld apartheid. Bad theology was responsible for the horrors and hell of the Middle Passage. Bad theology was what governed Hitler in his nonsense, evil nonsense. Bad theology presides over apartheid in Palestine. Bad theology showing up in white Christian nationalism that somehow upholds family values and supports Donald Trump. Yeah, bad theology. But liberating theology is that theology that sets the captives free, that fights for justice, that creates beloved communities. That's good theology. That's the God I serve. And so that just sends me over the edge with excitement, because tonight, one of my favorite people of all time, I'm talking about the Dean of Christian Theological Seminary. Check this. I am pursuing a PhD in African American preaching and sacred rhetoric at Christian Theological Seminary, and our beloved, brilliant, got it going on Dean is the one and only Dr. Leah Gunning Francis. And let me tell you something. When you talk about someone who is an activist, author, prophetic preacher, social justice witness, professor, and then she's an amazing wife, a wonderful mother. She does it all. And so I think it's only appropriate that on the second day of Women's History Month that we engage in conversation with this super bad sister. Back when I was growing up, I'd simply say she's supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. And so Dr. Leah, the Dean, I'm really glad that you've joined us tonight. Let me just say this. The amazing thing is I met her in writing before I actually met her. I taught a class at Paul Quinn College, and the class was on Black Lives Matter and liberation theology. And I taught from a book entitled Faith in Ferguson. Faith in Ferguson. And I mean, the students just loved it, fell in love with her. Long distance, didn't even know her, but just loved her writing. And then shortly thereafter, I was honored to meet her. And now she's come out with a sequel, Faith After Ferguson. And both of them are great books. So let me just say right now, whatever you do, please go ahead, get both books right now. It will bless your life, especially in the crazy, evil, racist times we find ourselves in. We just had, our primary election yesterday. And of course, here we are in Texas. I have added an S onto it. And here in Texas, they're doing everything to keep us from voting. And I believe you have a word for us, because I've read Faith After Ferguson and Faith in Ferguson. And so please, all of you, whatever else you do, make sure that you go ahead, get the books tonight. Faith in Ferguson, Faith After Ferguson. Both of them written by our special guest, the amazing Dr. Leah Gunning Francis. Listen, after you hear her, I promise you, you're going to rush, and then you're going to ask me, Pastor Haynes, when are you going to get her here to preach? I'm going to ask her that right after we get through, okay? Because you want to hear her preach, too. She's bad like that. So, Dr. The Dean, welcome. We're so glad to have you.
Dr. Haynes, it is a joy for me to be here with you and the wonderful, wonderful people of Friendship West Baptist Church. Thank you so much for having me.
It is my blessing, my blessing. So let's just get right into it. You wrote both Faith in Ferguson and Faith After Ferguson. I think all of us should know. Please don't embarrass me, y'all. Y'all know Ferguson, don't you? As in Ferguson, Missouri, Mike Brown. So that's the context. Think those years ago when Mike Brown was slain. And out of that erupted a movement for Black lives. And so Dr. The Dean has done something that I think it's the African proverb that talks about, until the lion's tail, the tail of the hunt, the tail is going to always glorify the hunter. And what you've done, Doc, you have allowed the lions to have the microphone. And my question to you is, why did you decide to write Faith in Ferguson, as well as the sequel that we will be discussing, Faith After Ferguson? Why? Why did you decide to write these books?
You know, Dr. Haynes, when Michael Brown was tragically killed in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014 by a Ferguson police officer, our family was living in St. Louis. I was on faculty at Eden Seminary there. And when the uprising began soon after, we found ourselves involved in a lot of the protests. We were involved with a lot of what faith leaders were doing in the faith community. And then a few months later, the good folks at Chalice Press reached out to me and said, "Oh, Dr. Francis, would you be willing to write a book on clergy involvement in Ferguson?" Mm-hmm. And my thought was, gosh, if I knew I was going to be writing a book, I would have been taking pictures and doing interviews along the way. But that's not what propelled me into the movement. What propelled me was my sense of faith, my sense of belief that this is what God was calling us to do as people of faith, to stand up, to stand with our young people, and to declare that Black lives do indeed matter. And if we're going to make that a reality, then we're going to have to work together for it. So out of that came Ferguson and Faith. And then some years later, they came back to me and said, well, would you be willing to go back to Ferguson and St. Louis and find out what's happened since then, to learn about what's some of the wisdom that we can take away from the movement that the world saw unfold right before their very eyes. And so I went back and collected some new interviews with some of the previous people I'd interviewed, some of the faith leaders, young activists, as well as added a few new voices. But friends, I didn't stop there. I pulled the narrative all the way through the U.S. Capitol insurrection because I thought it was important to be able to show that since Michael Brown was killed in 2014, here we are all the way up through 2021. And we saw incident after incident, whether you're talking Tamir Rice, who was standing on a playground at 12 years old in Cleveland, Ohio, or Sandra Bland driving in Texas, or Philando Castile, the Montessori school worker who was driving with his girlfriend and young child in the back seat, unarmed, and on, all the way up through George Floyd, and then culminating with the U.S. Capitol insurrection, where we had to watch with our own eyes a hostile takeover while the Congress was in session. Right. But all the while, as people ascended the steps of the Capitol, there was no fearing of life to the point where tear gas was not deployed, rubber bullets were not shot. They were able to make their way all the way through. And to this very day, there's been no real accountability for those who perpetrated that act. And so here we have this truth that we have to reckon with.
Thank you for that. And I love how you connected the dots between all that has gone on in terms of the slaying of Black lives at the hands of the state-sanctioned murder, as it were, and then connecting those dots even with January the 6th. And you have a chapter that's brilliantly entitled, "This Is Us," you know, because of the fact that we heard the President of the United States, I'm talking about the current one, saying, you know, we're better than this. This is not who we are. And you countered that and spoke truth to power and said, this is us. January 6th is us. And you can't fix what you won't face. So here's the thing that really inspires me, and that is you, brilliant academic dean, scholar, preacher, prophet, and yet you said it was faith that drove you. Your faith drove you to join the movement, getting in the streets there in Ferguson. There is an interesting narrative that the movement for Black lives is strictly secular, and that there was an absence of faith and faith leaders in the movement for Black lives. We just don't hear about that. So in the age of Mike Brown, Sandra Bland, Trayvon Martin, etc., your book counters that by declaring what? Faith in Ferguson and faith since Ferguson, as it were, faith after Ferguson. So talk to us about the role that faith plays in the fight for justice.
It was so important for me to tell that story, Dr. Haynes, because the world saw the tanks and the tear gas. But so many people had not seen are the clergy, the lay people, the church members, the young people who were standing and trusting and believing that this was not just a good thing to do, which it was, to stand up for Black life, but that our faith actually calls us to do this. We serve a God who loves us, who fashioned us, who formed us, and is one who stands on the side of the oppressed. God calls us, yes, to be in relationship with God, but also in relationship with each other. And we can't claim that we're doing that if we're not taking seriously the cries of those who are hurting, the needs of those who are suffering, the hurts of those who have endured so much. And so it was out of that sense of conviction, if you will, that this is what our faith calls us to, where we can pray with our feet, where we can pray while moving our hands to work together and stand together. You know, so many people would say that there were young people I remember encountering who said, you know what, I met God on the streets of Ferguson. I met Jesus on the streets of Ferguson, not because they mistook a man or a woman for God or for Jesus, but rather they weren't accustomed to seeing people stand in the streets with their collars on, although we know historically that has happened since the civil rights movement, but to be able for our children, our young people, to see clergy people, people of faith in collars and robes and stoles saying, no, we are here proclaiming that doing justice for Black people is doing the work of God. So it was important to be able to not just see and hear and know God was active in our sanctuaries, but it was important for everybody to be able to see that, no, God is right here in the midst with us, and we are joining God's transforming work in the world for racial justice right here on the streets.
I know that's right. I know that's right. Thank you. Doc, in the intro, you brilliantly throw shade with your academic sophistication at the news media. I love it because you said, and I quote, the story was not controlled by corporate news media outlets. There were no production managers, or editorial directors working to frame their narratives to fit the goals of the news company's agenda. Shade, you went on to say that we don't know what our understanding of the situation would have been if there had been no tweets, no Facebook post, and no Periscope live stream. Has the corporate media, or let me ask this, how has the corporate media shaped narratives about racial justice, and how did that change in the movement in Ferguson? And then tell us how we can tell our story and control the narrative.
What we saw on all of the major news outlets was tanks, tear gas. Oh, there's burning. There are people stealing things. Oh, see all of these out of control people. But when we drill down to see the truth of the matter, there were thousands of people on the streets around the St. Louis area for months that were marching, that were protesting without any type of incident. And so it's critical that we are able to tell the truth about what's actually happening in our midst, because with the agenda of the corporate media, right, who has one that has proven is not in the interest of Black lives or portraying Black people honestly and holistically, but rather in a very narrow, stereotyped kind of way, to be able to tell our own stories. The revolution, as some said, was not televised, but it sure was digitized. And so thankfully, through social media, we're able to tell that story. And we see why it's so important to do that. You know, I would laugh sometimes when some of the folks would say, you know, you'd see T-shirts saying, "This ain't your mama's civil rights movement." And I would kind of raise my little finger sometime and say, well, actually, it kind of is. In terms of, remember, if it had not been for SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Council, in the civil rights movement and the freedom riders, all those young people pushing the movement forward, who knows what would have happened if it had not been for women like Fannie Lou Hamer and so many others during the civil rights movement who did not risk life and limb. I don't know where we would be today. But what's different today is we were able to see that happening in real time. We did not have to just depend on some people telling the story. We had thousands of people telling the truth of the story through cell phones, through live streams, so that we could knit the narrative together in a more truer, authentic way that showed women taking leadership, that showed young people taking leadership, that showed everyday people just finding the leader within and saying, I'm not going to look for somebody to wait and give me permission to stand up and know what I do, what's right. I'm going to lock arms with my sister over here and my brother over here, and we're going to go in the spirit of God and say, no, Black lives do indeed matter. And we're going to tell that truth in our way, with our tongue, and how we want to do it.
Say that, Doc, say that. Listen, I'm Frederick Haynes. I am interviewing the dean of Christian Theological Seminary in Indianapolis, Indiana. I'm talking about Dr. Leah Gunning Francis. Dr. Francis is the author of, well, she's just a gifted writer, gifted preacher, but the books we're discussing tonight are Faith in Ferguson and Faith After Ferguson. Please, whatever else you do, make sure you get both books, bless yourself, and discover how your faith works in the context of social injustice, uprisings, and the like. Doc, here's the thing that is always interesting to me, and that is you have those more conservative persons, I'll be nice, who will say about marches, protests, and movements, well, you did all of that marching, but nothing changed. What did all of that really result in? You did all of that, but we don't see any results from it. And of course, we know better. So the question is that I'd like to just ask you right now, for those of our conservative friends who may be tuning in, God bless you, and that is, what changes came from the movement there in Ferguson, so that you could even write what? Faith in Ferguson and Faith After Ferguson. What changes came?
The first first thing that changed is the narrative around policing in the United States of America.
Come on.
It was the movement in Ferguson that blew the lid off of this myth that there was equal processes to policing in the United States of America, and the sustained efforts of people throughout St. Louis for months saying, no, we're not going to turn away. We're going to keep this in the public consciousness. And that has changed the trajectory of the conversation. The second thing, there were some tangible changes right in the St. Louis area. There was Tashara Jones was elected mayor of St. Louis. Congresswoman Cori Bush was sent to the U.S. Congress, unseating a long-term congressman. Wesley Bell was elected and overthrew the prosecutor who was the prosecutor for St. Louis County, the case of the police officer who killed Michael Brown. So there was a ground game that got started in St. Louis. People banded together, networked together to say, we have to start making sure that we're building political power, because our political power is our collective voice that helps us to say what we will and will not tolerate from the government that is fashioning our society. So those were some of the changes that did happen. Now, all that said, have we yet overcome? No. We have to remember, this is a long game.
Come on.
There is no one movement, there is no one uprising that is going to bring the kind of systemic overhaul that we desire to see. Every generation has had to carry the baton through its season. And while we know many of our ancestors did not live to see the change that they were working for, they ran their race with hope, trusting and believing that the God that they served, that the work that they were doing would yield good fruit for their children and their grandchildren. And we have to keep that in our hearts and minds. While, yes, we keep working to make change in the here and now, we have to remember, friends, that this system of racial injustice, systemic racism, is in the air, in the water, in the soil of the United States of America. And that is not upended easily, but we have to keep doing our part in our work so that our children can live into a future filled with hope.
Yes, Lord. Preach, Doc. So, Doc, I love the fact that you brought up the whole point of political power and the necessity of building political power, which brought about the changes that we see in St. Louis, as well as the overall narrative. I think that is so crucial. Martin Luther King Jr., you recall, after the '64 Civil Rights Bill was passed, he pressed Lyndon Johnson and said, okay, we need a voting rights bill. And Johnson said, I don't think I have the power to get it done. And King testifies that they then went to Selma in order to get him some power. Because he recognized, if we want to experience justice, we must wield political power. And so you write about that. You write about it brilliantly in Faith After Ferguson. And so my question is, given what you've witnessed, given your own activism and scholarship, how do we, in the age of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery, how do we, in the aftermath of what was supposed to be the racial reckoning of 2020, which instead became a backlash against perceived black progress, how do we, in this age of voter suppression, again, I'm in Texas, and here in Texas, there were people yesterday who found out I can't vote, or there were those who were denied the opportunity. Their request for a mail-in ballot that they've done for many years was rejected all of a sudden for this election. So how do we mobilize for political power and wield political power in this crazy age we find ourselves in?
One of the ways I think we need to do that, Dr. Haynes, is for all of the spaces and places where Black people gather, our congregations, our church communities, our sororities, our fraternities, our not-for-profit agencies that are run by us and for us, hopefully, we have to make that a priority. And so it's not a priority just for the members that are a part of that group, but to deputize, if you will, all of the people within that group to go and to talk to their neighbors, talk to their friends, talk to the other groups that they're a part of, because this really requires a ground game. We know that we just can't put out a tweet or hang up a billboard and say, okay, that's what we have to do. No, we have to start talking to more people about it. We have to keep raising the issues and press the point of how urgent the need is for us to have elected officials that are going to raise up and stand for the issues that matter most to us. But we can't just do it in silos. We can't just think it's somebody else's job. Right. We need to marshal the power that we already have. We need to leverage the power that we already have and use that determination to seek to build coalition with other people, other groups. There are others who are, they might not be African-American people, but they sure are in support of the movement for Black lives. How are we aligning and connecting ourselves with them so that we can continue to build that political power base? Because as we see playing out before our eyes, as you're saying, Dr. Haynes, on the state level, on the local level, in these school boards and trying to ban books and all the way the federal level, we have to be involved at every level, but we can't sit on the sidelines. We can't be silent. This is what we need to be talking about in our book clubs, in our communities of faith, in our sororities, in our fraternities, every place where we are gathered.
Yeah. You have a phenomenal line in the book that I underlined and underlined and underlined and underlined. And it's in a teaspoon of terms, you convey a ton of truth. You say, truth-telling is an act of justice. Truth-telling is an act of justice. Telling the truth is an act of justice. Doc, I need you to expound upon that.
Dr. Haynes, we have to stand in our truth. We have now witnessed, we've all lived long enough now to witness 4 years of a presidency where day after day after day, a lie was told with no accountability. Right. I mean, and it's all documented. Right. And so the trauma, the psychological terror of having to endure that and what that has done really needs to reinforce in our minds just how much we need to make sure we are standing in our truth and telling the truth. Listen, there's a reason in states like Indiana and Texas and Florida and all over this country, state houses are moving to ban the teaching about race and racism and white supremacy in this country. In other words, telling the truth. Right. Because when we tell the truth, then along with that has to come accountability. Yeah. Think about the Truth and Reconciliation, what happened in apartheid South Africa, where the Honorable Desmond Tutu, God rest his soul, was leading this effort, where so often people are quick to want to jump to reconciliation, but there first must be truth telling, because it's with the truth telling comes the accountability, and with the accountability comes the repairing of the damage that has been done.
The repairing. I love it, Doc. I love it. So there's a wonderful lesson in the book. Again, I am interviewing the Dean of Christian Theological Seminary. She is a preacher par excellence, professor, educator extraordinaire, and she's written these amazing books, Faith in Ferguson, Faith After Ferguson. In Faith After Ferguson, Reverend Deetra Wise Baker just taught a profound lesson. She testified that at a point she was chaplain serving in, prisons, and she said she felt like she had become a chaplain to the school to prison pipeline system. And I just see that as a profound metaphor, as well as a warning to many well-intentioned ministries that minister to hurting people, but they run the risk of being chaplains to systems that are unjust. So share with us how we can learn lessons from the Reverend Wise Baker and be prophetic witnesses as opposed to chaplains to these systems of oppression.
Dr. Haynes, we have to make sure that, especially as Christians, people of faith, we are clear about the difference between doing charity and doing justice. We're called to do charity, give charitable acts. We're called to feed those that are hungry and clothe those that are naked and care for those that are homeless. However, we are also called to do justice. What that means is we need to make sure we're getting underneath, well, why are so many people hungry? What are the systems that have created the conditions that make housing unaffordable and unattainable for so many people? This is what we have to make sure that we are doing the both and of. Yes, we need to care for those in need and provide for those in need, but at the same time, making sure that we are speaking truth to power and calling out the systems that make it such that we have such economic inequality. And with the prison industrial complex in the example that you gave, Dr. Haynes, with Reverend Baker, where she was serving in the Juvenile Justice Center in St. Louis, and basically there to provide care for the children who were being incarcerated and the injustice that goes with that. And she said, I just can't stand by and have prayer with the children anymore. While that's important, I need to get busy seeing why so many children are being sent here. How do we disrupt and dismantle the pipeline to which they're being fueled in there? Listen, I need your viewers to know tonight, when I was teaching in St. Louis, one semester I designed a class where we actually took the students to the local St. Louis County Juvenile Justice Center. Now, here's the reason I'm telling this story. In St. Louis County, Black people only comprise about 10 to 12% of the population of all of St. Louis County. But when we went into that juvenile jail, the 12-year-olds, the 14-year-olds, the 16-year-olds, 98%.
Jesus. Doc.
That's not accidental, ladies and gentlemen. That's not just, oh, these kids are so deviant.
Yeah. 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 So, Doc, I think that's a perfect segue into my next question, because what's very interesting is that those who get upset when you raise, mother would call it raise sand, raise hell, fight for justice, there's always this consistent, clapback. Okay, well, what about black on black crime? And, I've learned to say, well, what about white on white crime? Because, more whites are killed by whites than anybody else. And so, as Michael Dyson says, it's really neighbor on neighbor, because crime takes place in proximity. But you have a response in Faith After Ferguson to the question that someone may raise, well, what about black on black crime? So share with us your response to what about black on black crime?
My response is, one, it creates a narrative that Black people just don't care about what's happening to Black people and Black communities. And that's just not true.
Thank you.
Decades, there have been churches, there have been organizations like the Live Free campaign and Cure Violence and Mothers for Justice and Equality, and the list goes on, of communities that have been speaking up, standing up, working against violence that is happening in predominantly Black communities. And so, number one, we have to, again, stand in our truth and acknowledge that, you know, this narrative that's spun to make it seem like Black people just don't care is just a false narrative too. There are organizations and groups and churches that have been speaking up, speaking out, and working towards that. Additionally, and what we cannot overlook is that until we address the conditions that create and make it possible for violence to flourish and be conducive, we're going to continue to see the type of violence and the disproportionate levels of violence that we see among and in predominantly Black communities. It is no secret, and we have all of the data, ladies and gentlemen, that when you mix poverty and communities that have been divested, their infrastructure has been crumbled, where their educational systems are underfunded, where policing in those communities, there's over-policing and under-resourcing, where the criminal justice system is wholesale sucking people from these communities into the criminal justice system, you are going to have higher incidences of violence. I'm reading a book right now titled A Peculiar Indifference, The Neglected Toll of Violence in Black America, where the author, a sociologist, Dr. Elliott Currie, is making plain and laying it all out how for decades the divestment from Black communities, and when you bundle that together, then you put in these lax laws with guns, you inevitably would have higher incidences of violence. The question is for us, what are we going to do about this? We're talking about our people, our daughters, our sons, our brothers, our sisters, our mothers, our fathers, cousins, neighbors that are being impacted on a daily basis. This is not a small matter, but one that is of utmost importance. Ladies and gentlemen, the leading cause of death for young Black men between the ages of 15 and 40 is homicide. There is no other demographic of people for whom that is true. And what we know is if that were true for white males between the ages of 14 and 40, there would be legislation that would work to address the systemic causes of this crisis. But none of that is happening for Black people. You look at the response to the opioid crisis. Most have lived long enough to remember the crack cocaine crisis. What happened with the crack cocaine crisis? We saw Black communities being flooded with crack cocaine, decimated, people being locked up on low-level drug offenses, too many children being born addicted to crack cocaine. And what was all of that met with? It was met with shame. It was met with the president calling Black women welfare queens. It was met with incarceration. Now here we live in the midst of what is known as an opioid crisis. Where so many of the users are white. And what is that being met with? Millions of dollars that have been poured into mental health resources, in addiction recovery resources, in addressing why is this happening? Why are so many people turning to this? Not being met with incarceration, not being met with degradation, but is being met with resources to help treat the cause, treat the symptoms, and humanize the people. What can happen, ladies and gentlemen, for the violence crisis in the Black community? It is a public health crisis. So to go back to the importance of us building our political power and being willing to yield it, this would mean that we would insist that our tax dollars would go to address the very root causes of things that are decimating our communities and destroying so many of our families and snuffing out so many precious, precious lives that haven't even had a chance to live into the fullness of their being.
Yeah, Doc, that is so powerful. And I especially hope we hear you in light of a statement made last night by the president in his State of the Union message. And he talked about defunding the police. No, we ought to fund the police. And yet, if you check out all of the public safety budgets from city to city in this country, you'll see that when you put investment of dollars in policing and juxtapose that to what? Housing, recreation, mental health services, services for the homeless. I mean, call the roll. All of those areas where what? You can say it's the soil or the climate where crime is going to thrive. But instead of having the courage to reimagine public safety and say we need to, what? Take some of that money that is going into these over-bloated police budgets and give that money for mental health services. Give that money to correct the housing shortage. Give that money for job creation, job development. It's so important that we don't fall for the okie doke. I think that's what I'm trying to say, because there's a narrative that, somehow, police solve crime? Not too often. Or prevent crime? Not too often. These are the things that prevent crime. And so I hope that we are hearing what you say. You say something in the book, again, I just underlined it. I said, Doc, you went there. You said that, and you write, and it's powerful. You said, you recommend that every church that has a flag in it, a U.S. flag, stars and stripes, red, white, and blue, they need to remove the flag from the sanctuaries. Now, if you look in this sanctuary, it ain't here. It wasn't at the one we came in before. And when I first came to Friendship West, one of the first moves I made after removing thing of white Jesus, we then had to get rid of the flag. And so, but in this country, there's almost a uniting and unholy wedlock of the flag and the cross. Why, Doc, should we remove flags from our sanctuaries?
Dr. Haynes, as Christians, we need to make crystal clear that we come to church to worship God. We do not come to worship country, nation, flags, patriotic symbols, etc. We come to worship God. And so what has happened in this country throughout its history, we see how the cross has become wrapped in the flag. You remember, back to that Capitol insurrection, they stood on the floor of the U.S. Senate and said a prayer.
Yeah.
This fusing of Christianity and nationalism is unholy. And so we do not need any symbol in our sanctuaries that would give the unsuspecting eye who sees it the impression that we are here to promote this narrative that we serve God first, then country. No, we serve God first, then God, then God, then God.
Come on, Doc. Doc, you something else. All right. Doc, I got one more question for you, one more question. And so we remove the flag and serve God, 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 and God. My question now becomes, and no, I want to set it up like this. You did something in Faith after Ferguson that was just anointed audacity, anointed audaciousness. It was amazing. You had a word for how churches could do the hard work of engaging in conversations about race and racism. I mean, you actually went there. Martin Luther King Jr. is applauding you from eternity because he maintained that in too many instances, the churches have been the taillights of the vehicle of society as opposed to the headlights, especially on questions of racial justice. And so my question is, Doc, how can, and what you were doing in the book was really talking to white churches about what they need to do. But there's some black churches that never ever deal with the issue of race. So my question is, how can we become those headlights? Because here's what's really sick to me. When you look at the racial problem in this country, it's always been baptized by the church. Okay, somehow or another, the church sanctioned slavery, segregation. The church was the model for segregation. Jim and Jane Crow segregation, they learned how to do that from the white church. So my question becomes, since we broke it, we need to fix it. And I'm talking about the church, the white church, and black folk who want to be the white church. And so my question is, how do we become the headlights? How do we have those courageous conversations so that we actually start as the church becoming the headlight as it relates to cutting through the darkness of racism in these yet to be United States?
For Black churches to do that, we too must stand in our truth. And that first posture of truth telling, where if you're a congregation or a part of a congregation where there's been no mention, no discussion of race and racism and the history of white supremacy in this country, it's time to own that. Mm-hmm. And it's time to change course. And so we have plenty of opportunities now to begin those conversations within the church. And if you're a pastor who's watching and you're like, well, Dr. Francis, I've never talked about this in my church. How do I go about doing this? There are wonderful resources available to you now that you can introduce this to the congregation through a book study. You can share honestly within a Bible study or other type of study within the church, starting within a small group, beginning to share about the conviction that you're having on your own heart, and then be able to move toward preaching about it and teaching about it. There are wonderful resources here now that can support you in that work. And so a lot of times people will say, well, that's not the train I rode in on, and I don't want to get on that train now. But it's like, listen, folks, right now, the train we're all on is not headed to a good place. Mm-hmm. And unless it changes course, this isn't going to be good for any of us. So we need our churches in a space now where they are willing to, all of them, stand in their truth, say, okay, we may not have been focused on this in the past, but we're going to start having the conversations that we need to tell the truth about what's happening with our people, all of our people. And so to muster the courage to do it, number one. Number two, be willing to start forming some groups and conversations through book studies. That's another way to start the conversation, and then moving on to preaching and outreach activities. And finally, there are churches in your area, in your city, in your region that are doing this work. Let some humility enter the heart. Reach out to them. Yeah. Talk to the pastor there. Talk to some of the people there to say, hey, how has this worked for you in this area where we live? And see how you can join and partner and learn from them. You don't have to recreate the wheel. So, but it starts first, Dr. Haynes, with number one, standing in our truth about this, having a willingness to do it, take the actual steps toward it, start building up small groups within the church, preaching about it, and reaching out to others that are in your area.
My Lord, my Lord. The Dean, Dr. Leah Gunning Francis, Dean of Christian Theological Seminary, amazing author. Dean, please tell us, how can we get Faith in Ferguson and Faith After Ferguson?
So thank you so much, Dr. Haynes, for having me. The books are available on Amazon or other booksellers and retailers where you can find them. They're also available through my website, leahdunningfrancis.com. Thank you so much for your support of this work.
leahdunningfrancis.com. Amazon, you can get the book. Please get the books. And listen, I got to let you know something, just a little preview. Friendship West made the book, Faith After Ferguson. Friendship West is in the book, y'all. We're in that book. So I'm super hyped. And Doc, I just want to thank you so much for sharing with us. You are a gift to all of us. I look forward to seeing you. I'll be in class next week. So I look forward to seeing you. So God bless you. Thank you so much for blessing us. Ladies and gentlemen, right where you are, give it up for the Dane, Dr. Leah Gunning Francis. Thank you, Doc. God bless you. And we're so glad.
Thank you so much, Dr. Haynes.
Listen, I want to just invite you to get to know this God who gives you faith in the midst of crises, racial injustice, in the midst of social injustice, a God who will give you a faith that works, a faith that works. I like that. And so if you have yet to give your life to Jesus Christ, if you know what it's like to feel lost and you're tired of feeling lost, now is a mighty good time to give your life to Christ. Dial the number on your screen, 469-498-0210. Dial that number. We have faith warriors, prayer warriors who will pray with you, who will share with you, counsel with you. Wonderful prayer warriors. Please dial that number, 469-498-0210. Or you're saying, hey, Pastor, I got that part right, but I just feel the need to join a church that is courageous enough to have conversations like this, that theology matters. If that's you, dial that number, 469-498-0210. We'd love to have you as a part of our church family. I'd love to serve as your pastor. So won't you dial that number right now, 469-498-0210. God bless you, and we look forward to you being a part of our family. Now, it's offering time. It is time to give generously and lovingly to our great God. The Bible teaches that Jesus said that tithing itself is the basement of giving. Read Matthew 23:23. He said, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you tithe this, that, and the other, but you forget about justice, mercy, kindness. He says, you ought to tithe, but not leave the other undone. Jesus said, it's more blessed to give than to receive. Jesus said, give, and it shall be given unto you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. I want you right now to give liberally and lovingly. Why? Because the Bible says so, but also because you know what this church does. This church is about that. It's about that life of serving those who are hurting and wounded, advocating for them, fighting for justice. We do that. So here's what you do. You can text to give, 972-200-9419, or the Givelify app. Download it. Search out Friendship West, a safe vehicle, or give online, friendshipwest.org, the FWBC app, or you can scan the code, the QR code, and give that way. Or, of course, my mother told me today she drove up to Friendship West to bring her offering to 2020 West Wheatland Road here in Dallas, Texas, 75232. God bless you. Don't forget, join us this coming Sunday. We're excited. I think it's the first Sunday in March. That means, of course, we'll be commemorating the sacrifice of Jesus Christ with Holy Communion and the Lord's Supper. So be prepared to share with us in that, but also be prepared, getting yourself ready for in a month's time, 1 month, first Sunday in April, we will open the doors of our facility in a safe and responsible fashion, worship and fellowship together, 10 o'clock a.m., the first Sunday in April. God bless you. Have yourself an amazing, restful evening. The Lord bless you. The Lord keep you. The Lord cause God's face to shine on you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up the light of God's countenance upon you and grant you peace. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen. God bless you.
We praise God for this impactful experience and for your joining us during it. For all of you who joined as visitors, you can share that you were here. Please do that by taking time to text FWVIZ to the number 28950. And for those of you who are saying, hey, I want this time that I'm visiting to be the last time I'm a visitor, you can join us. Here's how you do that. Join us by calling the number 469-498-0210 or email us at joinus@friendshipwest.org. When you email your first name, your last name, and your cell number, and we will get back with you. We're so excited that you are here. Until next time, blessings on you.
Friendship West Baptist Church.